Welcome to Tech Talk Tuesday, brought to you by Idaho Public Television and Montana PBS.
Hi, welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday. I'm Carrie Wardle from Idaho Public Television, and here with me is, I went to the wrong side. Here with me is Nikki Vredenberg from Montana PBS. For the month of October, we're talking kind of all things trauma-informed instruction. And if you didn't catch the first recording, we sort of defined ACEs and trauma and talked a little bit about why trauma-informed teaching is important. Things that we learn on the CDC website, there is a list of several preventative strategies, so ways that we can help prevent kids from having ACEs. And one of them, there's several, but one of them is teaching them social emotional skills. That really sort of helps not only them, but teaching parents as well, but really teaching kids how to sort of cope with those experiences, right? Because we can't control everything. We can't, and sometimes even parents can't control everything. Divorce is one that I think of all the time of, that's one of those things that's so prevalent. And so how do we help kids have the skills to learn how to deal with that in a healthy manner? And so today, what we're going to talk about is some resources for teaching kids social emotional skills, that some deal with trauma and some are just social emotional, to maybe help mitigate some of those the effects of trauma.
So one of the things that PBS stations are really proud to share with people is that our PBS Kids content, several of the programs that appear on our broadcast every single day, have already been aligned to social emotional learning goals. They started with those goals in mind and built the show around those goals. So here on the screen, you'll see a list of some of the shows. We'll be sharing the slide deck to these slides in a little bit, but if you also connect in the notes section, there is a link to a learning goals sheet that lists all of the PBS Kids programs and defines their learning goals as far as outside of SEL is with literacy and math and social studies. But added to that are some of the newer programs like Don Quixote. So if you follow this, you can see the age group and the fact that they all have themes and the characters discuss themes that are associated with social emotional learning. So we really recommend tuning into our early learning programming to support any resources any social emotional learning lessons that you're doing with your students. Go back to the slides here. In addition to that, Carrie and I wanted to go through some of the PBS created resources that exist for teachers, with teachers and their families in mind, that you can find. All of these resources are free and are research-based and really were intended to support teachers in their settings. So Carrie, do you want to go through a couple and then I'll go through a couple?
Sure. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. I will say Nikki and I just sort of picked some of our favorites, but like Nikki said, PBS is really very mindful about this. And so one of my favorites is Sesame Street and Communities. And if you don't know about this resource, you are missing out because it's amazing. And they have specific resources to deal with quite a few of the specific ACEs that we talked about in the previous webinar. And so Nikki just went to this website. If you click at the top on the topics at the top, and I will point out that you can toggle this to Spanish. So for parents or caregivers or kids who need the Spanish version, but you can see on here that there is there's a lot of things, but when we're talking specific to the ACEs, there's an incarceration one, there's handling grief, which is another one. There's a parental addiction. And so you'll see, and then there's obviously the traumatic experiences one. So you'll see a lot of those things on here. And if you click on any one of those, then there's a bunch of resources available to help you. And so this one's traumatic experiences. They'll all have a little video that comes from Sesame Street where they talked about that thing. But then you'll also notice that there's activities. There might be some books. There might be some additional songs. There's a using these resources sort of outline for teachers. And then you can see that there's a whole bunch of other resources on here. And that one, I love that. You want to scroll back down, it talks about the Breathe, Think, Do app right there. I love that app. I use that with my little guy. And it's a little monster who teaches the kids to breathe and then think about something and then do it. And so to take a breath, think, and then do. And so anyway, each of those topics looks like this. It's got a wealth of resources, all of which are free and available for you to print or download or show. You can filter by age. So if you're looking for specific resources just for grown-ups, you can filter that and it'll take out the resources. You can filter by length of time. So maybe you only have 10 minutes in class and you want to show something, you can filter the things that show 10 minutes or, the number of minutes. And then you can also filter by the type of resource. So maybe you just want to show a quick video or you want an online storybook or things like that. So you can filter these down. You want a printable to share, you can filter these down even more with the kids. But I love this resource, and Sesame is really, the Sesame workshop people are really very very mindful, and they've added topics to this, and they really do try to keep up with with topics that might be important to. In fact, I think the traumatic experience one is a fairly new one since I started, because we all just came from something rather traumatic, right? Or still doing it with COVID. So anyway, this is a great resource for you to share with your kids if you haven't. Do you want me to keep going? Daniel Tiger. I love Daniel Tiger. If you don't know, Daniel Tiger is sort of the spinoff from Fred Rogers' Neighborhood. And obviously for littler kids, there's some really great things. Daniel Tiger is all about social emotional. So the Life's Little Lessons one is a really great, again, content with lesson plans that talks about everyday things that kids experience that really is applicable to them. So separation, like, going to school and leaving your parents and going someplace that you've never been, and how do you feel mad, and how do we form appropriate friendships, and just a variety of things. And if you click on any one of those topics, there's some similar to what you saw with Sesame, where there's a little video that's usually got some songs, right? So there's an episode, there's an entire episode that you can watch, or there's just individual clips. And then there's an entire lesson plan that starts with tips and a classroom activity. And one of my favorites is a family letter in both English and Spanish, so that you can send that home and have that home to school connection, so parents can talk to their kids a little more about it. So I love the Life's Little Lessons. Daniel Tiger also recently came up with a collection. Well, it's not just Daniel Tiger, but when something scary happens and what kids can do to talk about emergencies or other challenging things and how they can do that. And so finding the helpers, which Nikki will talk a little bit about, but there's a variety of resources here, including activities and ways to really talk to kids about emergencies and what happens in times when we're not sure what to do. And so that's another really great resource from PBS. And again, that was something that was really in response to COVID and to what's happening in the world today. And then the final one that I'll share is a collection on PBS Learning Media called ACEs. It's actually from Tennessee, but it's got a lot of really great content. Idaho Public Television is working on putting together a similar collection of Idaho resources, so look for that. But for now, this is a pretty great resource. They did a series of episodes about trauma and ACEs, and then there's support materials to go with that. So that's a great resource as well.
So yeah, as Carrie mentioned, all those resources are free and were created by either PBS National or PBS member stations. A couple other ones that Carrie mentioned that I'll add on to. She mentioned the Meet the Helpers collection, and this is inspired by the famous quote from Mr. Rogers about, my mother always told me that when scary things happen to look for the helpers because there are always people helping. And the PBS station in Central Florida took that idea and created what we call the Meet the Helpers collection. And it was meant to introduce children to the helpers in their community. It kind of doubles as a career lesson as far as the different careers that are out there. But the videos feature various helpers and community workers. The worker introduces themselves, talks about their job, talks about how they help their community, and then speaks directly to the student and tells them how they can help the helper. And so we have a 911 operator. We also have the firefighters, we have line workers, meteorologists, just describing all of these helpers. They've also added the coronavirus section, understanding that for our very young students, explaining what this pandemic is about is really tricky. And so giving you the language to explain this to students and explain why washing your hands is important, what social distancing means and why it's important. And my favorite is, what is an epidemiologist? And teaching kids to say epidemiologist is super fun. So this is a great collection. Montana got to be involved in a study that looked at whether or not these videos could impact the anxiety that students feel around community emergencies. And that study did find that simply watching the media did reduce the fear and anxiety that children feel when a scary thing happens in the community. So take the media and pair it with great discussion and activities, and we're going to help our kids even more. The other one I want to share is this one, and it's called A Trusted Space. And this is really a resource for teachers to work and talk together about the trauma you've experienced this year as an educator supporting students during the pandemic, teaching from home, teaching online, teaching both at the same time, and the tremendous shift and the stress that has no doubt caused every single person who's been involved. This was a documentary created by another PBS member station called A Trusted Space, and it speaks to the way we are all going to make it through the trauma of the pandemic is to create a trusted space for teachers and students to come together and share their feelings, talk about their experiences, and heal so they can move on. This is a quick 43-minute documentary that can be used as a viewing experience among colleagues, a professional learning experience to promote some discussion among you. PBS hosted a national discussion with educators of this piece, and they've included those discussions in this collection as well, if you'd like to hear what some other teachers were thinking as they were watching the film. There's also a curriculum that is aligned to the film. So you would watch the film and then use the recommendations from the experts featured in the film to, in 5 days, create a trusted space in your classroom. So another nice resource, a pretty comprehensive curriculum for supporting your students in this current trauma that we are all going through. The other one is, a lot of these resources have been thinking about our youngest learners, but fortunately there are some tools and resources that PBS stations have created for some of our older students. And that is this podcast called On Our Minds. This was created in partnership with the PBS NewsHour and the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs. They hired 2 teenage youth named Noah and Zion to host and produce this podcast devoted to teen mental health. It is available wherever you get your podcasts, or you can listen to it right from this website. They produced a series of episodes last spring and are currently in production for a new season of episodes and adding to the hosts. They've done a wonderful job of making this very accessible and talking to kids in their language and using terms that they will easily relate to. And they've also captured a lot of diverse perspectives. So a lot of kids from all over the country will be able to hear themselves as they listen to this podcast. I noticed that my own empathy toward teenagers shifted quite a bit from just listening to this from an adult perspective. Suddenly those teenagers I might have growled at in the parking lot at the grocery store or when I drove by the skate park, I felt myself looking at them a little bit differently when I thought about all of the things that teenagers have had to endure throughout the pandemic, and what it's like to be a teenager nowadays. Just drastically different from when I was a teenager. Carrie, do you want to talk about
I love that
piece?
we included so that you included that resource for kids, because if you recall on the previous webinar that we had about this, I talked about how even just forming a connection with one person, one positive role model, can help mitigate the effects. There's no age limit on that. So even with teenagers, if a teacher, and they're harder, I realize, but if you are a teacher of a teenager and you can form a positive, safe space for them, you can still help to mitigate some of those effects of the ACEs. It's not just with, the littles, that at any point in a child's life, if they can feel like there is a safe and trusted adult, it mitigates some of the effects of the adverse childhood experiences that we've learned about. So don't give up on those teenagers. I think, gosh, I can't imagine the world that they live in these days, very different from ours. And so, yeah, still having the empathy for them and connecting with them. I think sometimes it's easier to have empathy and connect with littles, right? Because they're so cute, but it's not always with teenagers. So just keep that in mind, that there's no age limit for that if it's before you're 18, is what the ACEs study is, that if a child suffers one of those ACEs before the age of 18, so you have that same amount of time to really be the person who makes that connection with them.
Carrie, did you want to talk about this resource from the CDC?
Oh, yeah, that one is just a really great, if you click on it really quickly, there's just a chart there that has some really great suggestions for how we can help to prevent ACEs. And there's some really good suggestions here. One of those is, as I said, social emotional learning, which we're doing. But there's also, look at that, connect youth to caring adults. And so mentoring and after school programs and all of those kinds of things that I think we've just set up naturally because we care about people, right, are also ways that we can help really kind of offset and mitigate some of those responses. So the CDC has an entire website dedicated to ACEs. There's studies linked there. There's statistics. They have a really great infographic. So that's a great place to go as well, to really look for ways that you can help and to understand a little bit more about ACEs and how you can help prevent it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of Tech Talk Tuesday. We hope that you found some resources that will support you and your students, and stay tuned for our next Tech Talks, where we talk with real teachers from the states of Idaho and Montana about how some of these resources and strategies have worked in their classrooms.